Hello everyone, I'm Alex Dykes, and today we're out here taking a look at the 2014 Honda Accord plug-in hybrid. Now you may recall from a few weeks ago that I declared that the 2014 Honda Accord hybrid, that's the non-plug-in version, was my favorite car for the 2013 calendar year. That still applies right now even though we're into the 2014 calendar year, but does that translate to the Honda Accord plug-in hybrid? That's the question we're going to answer today. The Accord plug-in is a Honda Accord hybrid at its heart. Honda has made a few visual changes to the front end as well as some of the feature levels on the car in order to help differentiate itself from the other Accords out there on the road. The first thing you'll notice is this different front end. I don't think that this is quite as attractive, honestly, as the Honda Accord hybrid or the regular Honda Accord, but it definitely sets this apart from the regular Honda Accord hybrid. We also have standard LED headlamps here, which are optional on the regular hybrid model. The plug-in model gets these unique star-themed wheels. You'll notice that they're very small vents right here in the wheel, and that's because hybrids, especially a plug-in hybrid like this that has a big battery pack, they do most of their braking via regenerative braking, so you don't need quite as much brake cooling, and having a wheel that looks like this with very few holes is better for aerodynamics. The big difference on the side profile is right here, because that's where you plug in the Honda Accord hybrid, and that's done right here by the remote control. There's also a button on the inside, and that reveals a J1772 standard charging connector. Honda decided to use a relatively fast 6.6 kilowatt hour charger built into the Honda Accord plug-in. That means that you can charge the battery in about 4 hours with this standard 110 volt charger that comes with the car, or in about 40 minutes if you have access to a 240 volt level 2 charger. First off, it's that fast charger, and second off, the battery isn't terribly big. The usable capacity on this battery is approximately 4 to 4.5 kilowatt hours with a total capacity of around 6.5 kilowatt hours. That's a decent amount less than the Ford Fusion Energy, which is around 10 or so, and a decent amount less than the current Chevy Volt as well. Like the Accords before it, this generation of Accord continues Honda's tradition of having a very traditional side profile, very upright form as well. We have a very low belt line compared to other modern cars and a very tall greenhouse. We have an awful lot of glass going on the side, and that really improves driver visibility as well as the visibility for rear passengers. You'll notice back here we have this large side window, and you could probably see in this camera angle the rear headrests, and that means that it's a lot easier for rear passengers to see out of the car, especially if they're kids, because these windows go quite far down. Under the plug-in's hood we have the same drivetrain as the regular Honda Accord hybrid. Things start out with a 2-liter direct injection 4-cylinder Atkinson cycle engine. It's good for 141 horsepower, and that's mated directly to an electric motor generator that generates power and sends it along to the 166 horsepower electric motor that's connected directly to the wheels. There's also a battery pack in there and some other electronics to help buffer that power. If the electric motor needs more than the 141 horsepower engine can provide, then it gets that from the battery in the back. When everything is working together, system horsepower comes out at 196 horsepower. That's very similar to the Ford Fusion Energy's power figures, because the Fusion Energy actually has a little bit more horsepower if the battery is charged than the regular old Fusion hybrid. This system operates very differently than other hybrid systems out on the market. Below 42 to 44 miles an hour, it is not possible for the system to directly power the wheels with the engine in a mechanical fashion. The only way to do that is to have the engine generate electricity, send that along to the traction motor, and have that spin the wheels. Above those speeds, the system can lock up a clutch pack which directly connects the engine to the wheels via a fixed ratio gear set. It's essentially like having only 6th gear or only top gear in a car, and then in order to replicate the gears below that, it uses this electrical path, generating electricity, sending it along to the traction motor, and then driving the wheels with that motor. It's a very different style of system than you'll find in the Prius or the Fusion or the Volt, which all basically share the same kind of technology. Those all use a hybrid power split device that's a single planetary gear set, and it's a mechanical and electrical system. For plug-in duty, Honda inserted a larger battery pack in the trunk, and that increases the weight over the Honda Accord hybrid by about 200 pounds. That results in a slight lowering of the fuel economy ratings. The regular Honda Accord hybrid gets 50 miles per gallon city, 45 on the highway, and 47 combined. This model is rated for 47 in the city, 46 on the highway, which is a slight improvement for reasons we haven't been told, but a combined figure of 1 mile per gallon less, right at 46 miles per gallon. Your fuel economy will of course depend on how often you can actually charge your plug-in hybrid, because the more often you charge it, then the better fuel economy you're going to get. Like the other Accords, the plug-in model retains this 2-position hood prop, allowing you to keep the hood in nearly a vertical position or a more traditional position as well. It makes it an awful lot easier to work on your plug-in hybrid if you so desire. Front seat comfort in all Accords is excellent, and this plug-in is no different. Plug-ins only come in one configuration, and that configuration has a multi-way power driver seat with a 2-position lumbar support and a 2-position driver's seat memory. The passenger seat in all plug-in models is manual, and leather is not offered in the plug-in at this time. We do have a tilt telescopic steering wheel with a decent range of motion. Rear seat room was an area where previous generations of Accord have lagged some of the competitors. That's just not true in this generation, however. This Accord has a very accommodating back seat. The seat bottom cushion is a little bit close to the floor for my tastes as an adult, but children will probably appreciate that. We have a very upright seating position in the back, which I find an awful lot more comfortable. We also have very good visibility, as I said earlier. You can see right here the cutout for that side window in the rear is extraordinarily far back, so even if I'm leaning completely back in this seat with my head on the headrest, I can still see out the side. That also contributes to excellent driver visibility in the front. The Accord's upright profile also helps when it comes to headroom. I'm 6 feet tall and I have about 1.5 inches of headroom left in this back seat. If I was in a Ford Fusion Energy, I would be an awful lot more cramped. Well, the Fusion Energy does purport to have just about the same amount of rear seat legroom. Headroom is severely limited in that Energy, and that's just because of that sexy coupe-like profile. It also has a negative effect on rearward visibility. If I move over to this right seat, this front seat is all the way back in its track, suitable for a 6'5" passenger I had in the car, and I still have about 3 inches of legroom left there. It's a very large back seat. These back seats are also slightly different for the plug-in hybrid model because I also get 2-position heated seats back here for the outboard seats. That's low and high. The button's right there on the door. The reason for the heated seats is because if you're driving in electric-only mode with this car, it's more efficient to heat the seats than heat the cabin. Moving over to this middle seat, because of the profile of the Accord, I still have a little bit of headroom left. My hair is brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling. That's more than you can say about the middle seat in the Ford Fusion. Rear seat passengers do have a comfortable center armrest with 2 large cup holders, but one thing you won't find back here is a folding rear seat back, and that's because the hybrid Accord as well as the plug-in Accord do not have a folding rear seat back like the Ford Fusion or the Chevy Volt or the Toyota Prius. It is something that you do need to keep in mind if you frequently carry long items in your car. Well, the trunk pass-through on that Ford Fusion Energy is not terribly big. It's only about 3.5 inches to 4 inches tall or so. It is the entire width of the seat back, so you can put longer items like surfboards or ironing boards or that sort of common item in your car, and you won't be able to do that in this Accord plug-in. Let's take a quick look around the interior. We have height adjustable seatbelts for the driver and the front passenger. As I said before, the Accord plug-in comes only in one trim, and that one trim does have cloth seats rather than leather seats. You will find leather seats in the regular hybrid, but not in the plug-in at this time. Over on the door panels, we do have soft touch plastics for the most part on the door. That's that black portion as well as the stitched portion on the door. We do have hard touch plastics right over there by the window switch. We do have a nice soft touch armrest. Well, the gasoline-only Accord has an interesting alternative to fake wood on the dashboard. Here we get a metallic theme. Soft touch upper, hard plastics lower on the dashboard, which is fairly common in this segment. A very large glove box, as you can see right there. All plug-in models come standard with Honda's up-level 2-screen infotainment and navigation system. We have a large high-resolution 8-inch screen right up there in the dashboard, and then we have a smaller touchscreen right here. This touchscreen controls the audio functions as well as certain other features in the system. If you want to know more about this, then go ahead and click that link at the bottom of your screen to be taken over to the Honda Accord Hybrid infotainment review. The system operates very much the same as that Honda Accord Hybrid that we had, except that we don't have XM radio in our plug-in model. Below the infotainment system, we have the 2-zone climate control, which is standard in the plug-in hybrid, as well as the power button, because keyless entry and keyless go are also standard. Below that, we have the controls for the navigation system. These buttons really just control that 8-inch screen that's nestled high in the dashboard, direct access buttons to phone, nav, info, audio, settings, menu, etc. This is a multi-way joystick knob, and it also has a rotary selector right there. One thing that I do dislike about the Accord's interior, and this goes for all models of Accord, is that they put a power outlet and the USB input, which I use all the time in a car, right here in view of the driver rather than hiding it away in some cubby. It's a small complaint, but it is one that I will note. Means that I have to have my phone out and around. Back in the center console, we have a very traditional gear shift, heated seat buttons. Even though these are cloth seats, we do have heated seats. Moving back, we have 2 extremely large cup holders. These were very easily able to accommodate large takeout sodas like this without them bumping into one another. Soft center armrest right here with a decent storage cubby and an extra 12-volt power outlet right there. The Accord Hybrid and the Accord Plug-in share an instrument cluster. Over here we have the battery level gauge, we have the fuel level gauge, and then over on the other side we have a power and charge gauge. This tells you basically how much power you're consuming and how much braking energy you're recovering into the battery. I find the charge gauge very useful because it really helps you gauge your braking in the car. We have a large analog speedometer with a full color LCD right in the middle of it. That LCD does give you trip information, hybrid system status, range, and allows you to adjust certain vehicle settings as well. Moving out to the steering wheel, we have an attractive design with grips right there on either side of the steering wheel. This side of the steering wheel is where you'll find your radio controls. And this button right over here cycles between screens on that 8-inch LCD right there in the dashboard. Below that, you'll find your telephone controls as well as your voice recognition button. These buttons here control that multi-information display right in the middle of the speedometer. And here you'll find the controls for your radar cruise control system. Radar cruise control is standard on all plug-in hybrid models. From this angle, you can really see the sparkly black plastic that is found on the steering wheel as well as on the dashboard right there by that touchscreen LCD. I'm not quite sure why the plastic is sparkly. It is kind of an odd touch. It's one that you also find in the regular hybrid model as well. To the left of the driver, you'll find the Econ button, the lane departure warning button, because lane departure warning is standard on all plug-in hybrid models. The little button there to open the charging door. And then if we move over here to the driver's left, you can see the 2-position memory for the driver's seat. Trunk space is limited compared to the regular Accord and the Accord Hybrid. The regular Accord has a very good sized trunk for this segment, but the Accord Hybrid gets a little bit small, and this plug-in is even smaller. We lose just about half of the trunk space for the battery and its cooling system, which is behind this partition right here. In truth, the battery itself only comes up to maybe about here in the trunk, but the rest is all the cooling ducts and the fans and everything else to keep that battery cool. That means that our trunk space is reduced to about 3 roller bags. This is the largest roller bag you can carry on a domestic flight. And if you're lucky, you could squeeze 3 of them in the trunk. It really just depends on how squishable your luggage is. You can fit 2 on the sides and maybe 1 right up front there. Under this hatch in the trunk, you will find storage for that 120-volt power cable, as well as a can of Fix-A-Flat and a tire inflator. That's because the Accord plug-in does not come with a spare tire. That's fairly common in the industry where we're trying to save as much weight as possible. On the flip side, however, you can pull out this large foam holder, which does hold all those things in place, and you'll notice that we have a very large spare tire well still available there. You won't be able to fit a full-size spare tire, but I have been told by some owners that they were able to put a compact inflatable spare tire right there under the battery and under that partition. This means it's now time to find out how the Accord plug-in scores in my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. Getting in and out of the trunk is fairly easy because of the step-in height. It's fairly low. The trunk is also fairly large for a plug-in hybrid, and we have a nice convenient handle right here to close the lid on ourselves. Overall, this score is an 8 out of 10 as far as plug-in hybrids go. Although the drivetrain under the hood doesn't have any relationship to the Toyota Prius, the way that the plug-in Prius and the way that the plug-in Accord Hybrid operate are very similar. And that's really just dictated by the size of the battery pack. Because of the size of the battery pack, this vehicle can't stay in electric mode as often as the Ford Fusion Energy or as the Chevy Volt can. This means that driving at slow speeds like we are right now, even though I have the air conditioning on, the engine hasn't started yet. We do have a full battery in this Accord plug-in. Like the Fusion Energy, the Accord plug-in hybrid has a resistive element cabin heater as well. So if you're driving slow speeds and you need some cabin heat, then the car will use the battery in order to heat the cabin. If, however, it's terribly cold outside or your heat demand exceeds the ability of that resistive element heater, the vehicle will turn on the engine for you. As we start to climb this hill relatively gently, we're still in EV mode, but if I press on the accelerator pedal more than maybe about a quarter or a third of the way, it turns on the engine because the battery can't provide quite enough power in order to drive this car forward. Even though the electric motor can supply 166 horsepower all by its very self, the battery can't provide that much power. My estimate is that the battery can probably provide about 40 horsepower or so, and that's why you have to turn on the gasoline engine. Because below 40 miles an hour, or about 42 miles an hour, depending on which spec sheet you believe, this car is a true serial hybrid. So the electric motor is the only thing driving this car forward below that 42 miles an hour or so. That means the gasoline engine has to generate power, augmented by the battery if required, and then that shuttles it off to the traction motor, which is actually driving the car forward. The difference between this and the regular Accord Hybrid is that the battery is slightly larger and it also can dissipate at a slightly faster rate. In terms of driving dynamics, this car isn't very different from the regular hybrid Accord, and that's because it's not that much heavier. The weight difference is about 200 pounds or so, and because all of that 200 pounds is in the back, it actually makes the Honda Accord have a slightly better weight balance than it would otherwise. The difference is really just like sticking a regular adult in the back seat of a regular Honda Accord Hybrid. That's really what this feels like, so the difference is very minor out on the road. This means that our 0 to 60 time drops just by a slight hair down to 7.1 seconds from 7.0 seconds in the regular hybrid. And we still get the same kind of cabin noise levels in this car because it's basically the same car, so still score about 69 decibels in terms of cabin quietness right at 50 miles an hour. The big thing you notice about the Accord plug-in is that it drives just like the regular Accord hybrid out on the road, which is very much like the Prius Plug-in. That's a little bit different than the Ford Fusion Energy and very different than the Chevy Volt, because the Chevy Volt drives just like an EV as long as the battery is charged and it's in EV mode. The Ford Fusion is somewhere in between the two, because the Fusion, if it's in EV mode, will try and drive in EV mode only. However, the performance is very different than when it is in hybrid mode. So the 0 to 60 time is about 50% longer in that Ford Fusion Energy if you're trying to drive in EV mode only. And that's just because the battery can't put out as much oomph as the Chevy Volt battery can. The Chevy Volt, on the other hand, has the largest battery pack, and so it just feels more like an EV. But it's also heavier, and you have all those regular old EV compromises. The EV compromises in the Volt are both aesthetic as well as performance oriented. We have a harder plastic interior, we have that battery that occupies where you would normally put a fifth seat in a car, so the Volt is a strict four-seater, as I said earlier, and those are definite compromises when it comes to comparing the Volt to the Prius plug-in, the Honda Accord plug-in, as well as the Fusion Energy. When it comes to electronic driver aids, the Ford Fusion Energy definitely wins the battle. It has a wider variety of driving aids, and their driving aids just operate a little bit better than the Honda systems do. Honda's radar cruise control has some peculiar behaviors to it. If you're coming upon a vehicle relatively quickly, the system seems to lag a little bit before it decides to brake. If that car moves away in front of you, the system has a definite lag before it decides to accelerate. And if you have your foot on the accelerator pedal and then you hit the set button on the radar cruise control, this car tends to decelerate a decent amount before it then accelerates back up to that speed. It's just a little bit less elegant, less refined than the Ford system. The Accord has lane departure warning, but it doesn't have lane departure prevention, whereas the Ford has an active steering lane departure prevention system that will literally steer you back in the lane. Part of that system is also a self-parking system in the Ford. You just hit the little button and it will parallel park the car for you after telling you whether or not you'll fit in the space. Those options are, of course, added extras. They're not standard on the Ford Fusion in any model, so you do have to check those little option boxes, and they don't seem to be terribly common on the dealer lot. Honda, on the other hand, focuses on the meat of the segment, and they configure all their vehicles in what you'd consider to be popular configuration packages. The Accord plug-in comes only in this one package, as we've been showing you in this video. We'll talk about that more, however, at the end. Thanks to 225 width tires, handling in the Accord is excellent, even though these are low rolling resistance tires. These are the same size you'll find on the regular Accord hybrid, so the handling is relatively similar. A lot of people comment that this sedan feels heavier out on the road, and maybe it does, but it's really just a very small amount. The difference seems to be less in this Accord plug-in than you find in the Ford Fusion versus the Ford Fusion Energy. That puts the Accord plug-in a very close second in terms of driving dynamics, right behind the Ford Fusion Energy. And that's just because the suspension in this Accord is a little bit softer, a little bit more compliant than you'll find in that Ford Fusion Energy. In the grand scheme of things, the Volt comes in a relatively distant third, and the Prius comes in at the bottom of the pack. Braking feel is particularly good in the Accord hybrid as well as the Accord plug-in because of how Honda designed this braking system. They borrowed the braking technology from Honda's FCX Clarity, which is their hydrogen-powered vehicle, and then they've modified it for use in this hybrid car. The real innovation in the system, however, is how this vehicle deals with full batteries and engine braking. In a Prius or a Volt or a Ford Fusion Energy, which all use a hybrid planetary gear set power splitting device, when the battery is full, it has to either switch to friction brakes or it actually has to involve the engine mechanically in order to give you engine braking. The Accord doesn't do that. What the Accord does instead is when the battery is full, it uses the traction motor that's actually powering the wheels normally, like right now when I'm starting off from the stop sign, and it uses that to generate electricity. It sends that electricity over to the generator that's attached to the gasoline engine, and it causes the gasoline engine to rotate, thereby consuming the power. Because in order for regenerative braking to work, the power has to go somewhere. And in a Prius or a Ford Fusion Energy or a Chevy Volt, there's nowhere else for that power to go in that drivetrain system. However, in this Honda Accord, there is somewhere for that power to go. It just shuttles that power over and uses it to spin the engine around. That results in very, very reliable brake feel because the brake feel doesn't have to change when the battery is full. It just sends the power somewhere else. It's a simple and elegant solution to the problem of brake feel because every other EV out on the road and every other hybrid out on the road has a definite difference in feel when you transition from regenerative braking to friction braking when that battery gets full. And the Honda Accord Hybrid and the Honda Accord Plug-in just don't do that. During my week with this car, I've been averaging 56.5 miles per gallon on average with a full battery on each end of my daily commute. That's a notable improvement over the 47.5 miles per gallon I averaged in the regular Honda Accord Plug-in, but it's not quite as good as the average that I got in the Ford Fusion Energy or the Toyota Prius Plug-in. It is, however, better than the average I received in the Chevy Volt on that same trip. The reason for that is because the Chevy Volt gets much lower gas mileage than the other three competitors in this segment once that battery is exhausted. The Prius scored the best because it gets the best fuel economy once the battery is exhausted. And the Ford Fusion Energy, it really depends on how long your trip is. If your trip is fairly short, then it's going to get better fuel economy than this Honda Accord Plug-in. But if your trip is long, then the Accord Plug-in will actually be the better option for you. Your fuel economy will of course vary greatly, and it really depends on how often you can charge the car and your driving style, whether you have a lot of highway driving or a lot of city driving. Because the engine has to be running in this car in order to really do highway driving, just like the Prius Plug-in, then your fuel economy difference may not be as noticeable as you might think right up front. Honda has kept pricing on their plug-in very simple. However, it is still one of the more expensive ways to get solo access to California's carpool lane. Pricing is $39,780, and there's really only one trim level of Accord plug-in at this time. Compared to the Ford Fusion, the Fusion comparably equipped is $37,243. The Chevy Volt cannot be comparably equipped, but it's around $36,035, and it's missing a decent number of features that you'll find right here in this Accord plug-in. The Prius plug-in is $38,720, and again, you will find a few features on this Accord that you won't find on the Prius. As with the other plug-ins and EVs sold in America, there are federal and state tax credits available in California and other states with the Accord plug-in. This Accord plug-in currently is only sold in California and New York, but Honda tells us that it will soon be sold in all 50 states. Keep in mind, however, that those federal tax credits may not apply to everyone, so don't depend on them before you check with a tax professional about your tax situation. Those federal tax credits are also sized by the capacity of the battery pack, and that means that the Chevy Volt currently gets the largest tax credit in this segment. The Ford Fusion gets a middle-sized tax credit, and this one gets one of the smaller tax credits along with the Prius plug-in because this is one of the smaller battery capacities in this very small segment. It's also important to know that California has a cap on the number of carpool stickers that they give out for plug-in hybrids, and that number is supposedly rapidly approaching. So if you really want one, you'd better act fast. That brings us conveniently to the question of, is this now my favorite car? Does this make my favorite car even better because now I can take my favorite car in the California carpool lane all by myself? And the answer is not quite. I don't find quite the same amount of value in the Honda Accord plug-in as I do in the regular Honda Accord Hybrid. The regular Honda Accord Hybrid is still by far my favorite car that's available in the United States today, and I know that people look at me strangely. They look at me like I have 3 eyeballs or something when I say that, but the Honda Accord Hybrid just fits me very well. Yes, this is very much like that, and it allows me access to the California carpool lane. However, the price tag is just a little bit high. The Fusion Energy is about $2,500 less expensive than this Accord plug-in when comparably equipped. The Fusion also can get a slightly larger federal tax credit. However, the Fusion doesn't have the kind of rear seat headroom that you can get in this sedan. It's not quite as comfortable either. However, the Fusion is better looking, I think, in my opinion, than this Accord plug-in. That means that by a very narrow margin, the Fusion Energy is my favorite plug-in sedan at the moment. However, this Accord plug-in hybrid is a very close second. A distant third would be the Prius, and at the bottom of the pack currently is the current generation Chevy Volt. Before Volt fans come after me with pitchforks, part of my reason for putting the Volt at the bottom is just the length of my commute. It's a relatively long commute, and the Volt just doesn't do that well in terms of fuel economy, and I find myself frequently needing 5 seats, and that really puts the Volt out of the running for me since it only seats 4. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2014 Honda Accord plug-in. Go ahead and click on that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. Like this video, share this video, comment on the video, tell me what you liked and what you didn't like. I encourage you also to click on over to our recent review of the Ford Fusion Energy as well as the regular Honda Accord Hybrid, that's the one without the plug, and I'll see you next week.